Today I'm going to do a video on the common cold, like it says on the title, and probably what you clicked on. And, basically I've been reading this book. It's called Achoo. It's by this, journalist, by, Jennifer Ackerman. She writes this pretty well, probably a little bit different than what you'd think in most medical books that, I try reading. But I really like the way that she tries wording things, and, like, when I put my notes inside, it's a little bit easier to understand. Not sure, it does have some big words that sometimes I have to, like, look up in different times, but it's a lot less of the medical terms, but it still kind of gets its point across and does tell you some things you probably didn't know. For example, about the common cold. Okay, so, just basically start this off. Let's start it off like a little bit of a scenario. So let's say you are perhaps going on, like, the grocery store, and, you're there, and it's probably like Christmas. You're kind of in a rush, but so you go to your the person who checks out some of your food, but then you don't even notice until after they're already handling your food that they're noticeably sick. So that they're noticeably sick, like they're sniffing every like 10 or so seconds, and most of the time it seems fine until all of a sudden they have like a barrage of sneezes going right into, and they're like most likely spreading all over your food. And this may worry you a little bit, but to reassure you, they scrub their hands in some hand sanitizer before continuing. Now, you might be already in a lot of stress out. You're like, oh man, what should I do? Is this really bad? And before you think about anything getting worse, all of a sudden, right before, as they're finishing, they kind of wipe their nose with the back of their wrist, and then they proceed to go deep into your bag with their dirty hand to give you your receipt. Probably touching all of your organic foods, broccoli, apples, fruits, everything else that you've had, and you've been wondering, you're probably thinking to yourself, what's the risk? Like, is it really bad? How bad is this going to be? Etc. So, based on this book, they did do a couple of research. So, for example, by this one professor named, his last name Andrews. By the way, that's one of the first times I've ever seen Andrews with an E-S at the end, but that doesn't really matter. Basically, he did some studies where he had several people go in groups, one of them sick, the other one not, and when they're in the same room for a little bit of a while, and it turns out the chances of the other person getting sick is actually not that high. It's only about 1 in 5 chances. And so, the one thing that really struck against the guy is like, okay, this is low considering it's low considering this, but it's high considering how you can get the cold. And the cold, it's through the nostrils. It goes from one person's nostril to the other. Now, you might be wondering, what are these little things? Now, these are called rhinoviruses. They are typically the main cause of the common cold. And so, these little guys kind of shaped like this. They, basically what they do, just like most kind of viruses, they go to a cell, they, take their RNA, go into the main host, nucleus, and replace the DNA that they're trying to make different perhaps proteins or different like cells. They replace it with theirs, so then the cell starts just making more of them until the cell destroys itself, and then there's a bunch of these constantly spreading over and over. And then that's probably when the body triggers the alarm system where it's trying to get rid of these guys. So yeah, that's what they are. But he was a little bit shocked because it's 1 in 5th, but that's considerably high if it has to go from nose to nose. So how is this? So going to another guy, his name was Gwaltney, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and he was a professor who really liked poker. And so what he did is he had people go in groups, and they were like maybe playing poker, or maybe they were eating probably the same food, or maybe they even gave each other kisses, and he tried to recording how much they got sick. Well, apparently the people played poker. None of them got sick. 0%. But even the people with just kissing each other, even, or having a lot of physical contact, just only 8 to 9%. So it's, again, not very high. And so the way to get sick is really you have to have a prolonged contact with the other person. And so how does this contact go? Well, this contact, normally it's because you'll you'll probably touch your nose, then to your hands, then touch something else, or the other person's hand, and they're going to touch it back into their nose. We'll go over that in a little bit. But also what he did is he did a research of 500 plus people. He did a study with 500 plus people, and what did he notice through these? Well, what he noticed is that most people get sick at their homes, because even though there's a bunch of people sick, not many of them got sick in this little batch. Most of the time it's because they don't actually touch the sick people, and so at home you do touch the sick people at your house, and that's also probably why employees get sick, is probably because their kids get sick, because actually the in schools that's probably where the sickness goes around the most, and so that's why kids normally get the sickness first, because they're the ones who pass it on to the adults most of the time. So yeah, going on to this other guy, his name is Hendley, also a professor, actually a friend of the last guy, Waltney. Also did poker. He did do a couple studies himself, and noticing that how people get sick is probably because, like I said earlier, they touch a doorknob maybe after they touch their hands with their nose. Then their hands are gonna have the little particles, and they're gonna like touch the doorknobs, and then someone else is gonna go reach for the doorknob, and so that's how they're gonna get sick. Or it's typically through a handshake. Through handshakes, because probably when I touch it, then I go reach for someone else's hands. They did also do a study that about 1 in 10 Americans admit after wiping their nose with their hands they do one of those things. And actually, typically spreads through hands. The common cold typically spreads through hands. And it's actually so effective, the rhinovirus has evolved so much that they can go in inanimate objects for a whole 2 hours. That Hendley has looked at. He found a rhinovirus, put it somewhere, waited for about 2 hours, and noticed it was still intact and still able to infect people. Now, like I said before, you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought the contact had to be prolonged. Well, the contact can actually be 10 seconds, because 10 seconds is going to be a little bit, if you go for 10 seconds handshaking someone, it's a little bit past awkward, so technically it considers as prolonged. So yeah, technically it goes for prolonged as well. So yeah, it's typically this kind of process. Basically, it goes from your nose touching to your hands to maybe a doorknob, someone else touching a doorknob to their hands, and then going back into their noses. So yeah. And if you don't believe me that most people are going to be like, wait a minute, I don't pick my nose, I don't touch my eyes or stuff like that, how am I going to get sick? Well, this other guy, another professor, last name Nikas, did do this study where he had some students go onto the cameras and record people for 3 hours in workspaces of several different students, and counted how many times did they touch their face. And the result, on average, they touch their eyes, noses, and nose, or eyes, nose, and lips 16 times per hour per person. So this is actually a lot, and this really does prove that people, this is actually a really easy way for people to, get sick. And so, because of this, there was this politician named Mark Cooper. He even specifically said he would not take handshakes anymore. So whenever someone would go reach their hand for a handshake, he would politely decline, and he would give them a little pamphlet on spreading diseases, which handshakes, like I did say, was definitely one of them. And no, how do they touch their noses, their mouths, and their... How do people touch their nose, mouths, and eyes most of the time? Well, even nose picking, I hope this is a little fun fact, nose picking does actually have a scientific meaning. It's called rhinotilexomania, which basically means nose picking, and based on rhinoviruses, we can tell that rhino means nose. So yeah. That's basically about that. But just for a last little thing, most people do say that, oh, okay, back to the grocery thing, when the guy sneezed all over all the fruits, is he really infecting people? Well, this guy named Dick, last name Dick, also a professor, he did do this study where he had people play poker, but they had maybe one of those head things where like the dogs can't actually like bite other people, so they had them wear that, or they gave them arm braces where they can't actually touch their faces. And so most of the time, like, they had the noticeably sick people, they had them wash their hands first, but if the sick people did not have the virus on their hands, they didn't have the virus in hands, but they're still able to sneeze on the other people. They're still handling poker chips and poker cards with the other people who also can't touch their own faces, probably because they have like the arm braces. And no one was actually getting sick. So this proves that most of the time, the common cold is not airborne. So like, if someone sneezes on another person, chances are they're not going to get sick. It has to be a physical contact with like the virus on something to touch something. It's not going to fly through the air. But yeah, that's basically it for our video. I hope you did like it, and I will continue making more of these. And please tell me if anyone else is interested in what else should I do, any infectious agents that I may be concerned of that I can maybe do a video on, please tell me. And I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.